All right, I think we'll try to get things going here and we'll let others join us as they will. Welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I'm Emily Chadwick. I'm the chair of the Portsmouth Smart Growth. We're really excited to bring you tonight's speaker, Aaron Naparstek. He's the founder and former editor-in-chief of Streets blog, and he's a current co-host of the podcast War on Cars. We had planned to bring Aaron to Portsmouth back in May, and unfortunately, due to COVID, everything got postponed, and here we are now virtually. So it's a little bit different. Bear with us. This is our first virtual event, so we're trying it out, and we'll do the best we can, and we'll hopefully it'll still be a great event for you tonight. We're really excited to bring Aaron here. For anyone unfamiliar with Portsmouth Smart Growth, we're an independent, volunteer-led nonprofit that presents ideas and encourages discussion and policy development around planning issues in Portsmouth and the Seacoast. Our goal is to support a vibrant, sustainable, livable, and walkable community consistent with the principles of smart growth. All of our events are free and open to the public, and we rely on the generosity of our sponsors and for all of you and all of your donations to bring such incredible national thought leaders to our community, like Aaron. You can find out more information and watch videos of all of our past events or make donations at portsmouthsmartgrowth.org. You can follow us, Portsmouth Smart Growth, on Facebook and Twitter. We'd especially like to thank our sponsors, Piscataqua Savings Bank and the Jeffrey E. Clark and Martha Fuller Clark Fund of the New Hampshire Charitable Foundation. And we have a very special thank you for Laura Horwood-Benton for helping us with the technical aspects of tonight's presentation. And we're really appreciative of her time tonight to help us out. Aaron Naparstek is a journalist, an advocate, and a storyteller. He's the founder and former editor-in-chief of Streets blog, an online publication focused on progressive urban planning, transportation policy, and a more human-centered, less automobile-oriented design approach to cities. More recently, he's the co-creator and co-host of the podcast The War on Cars, about the 100-year struggle between the automobile and the city and how to make sure we, humanity, win it. Aaron has also been a Loeb Fellow at the Harvard Graduate School of Design and a visiting scholar at MIT's Department of Urban Studies and Planning. Tonight, we've asked Aaron to speak about becoming better bike advocates for our community and to guide a discussion on changing the tides of hesitancy and resistance to biking infrastructure in our community. Please help me to welcome Aaron Naparstek.
Hi, thank you for the nice intro. Appreciate it. How strange, where's all the people? It's in Zoom, it's very strange. Thanks so much for having me. Let me try to, well, I'll stay here for a second. Yeah, first, I wish I could be there. I love Portsmouth. I think it's like one of the most beautiful little cities in all of New England, if not the country. And I was really looking forward to visiting with you guys and getting a chance to be in the city. So thanks for having me. Let's see. I guess we'll just go right ahead. This is sort of my first, as you'll see, this is actually my first sort of solo Zoom presentation before a crowd. So hopefully, we'll get it right. Let's see here. I'm gonna share the screen. Can you guys see everything? Can you see the stuff you're supposed to see? Can you see a slide?
Yep, looks great.
Okay. All right. Let's see here. So, word has it you guys have a bike lane in town, and some people aren't happy with it. And I come with good news, and that is that this is like the world's most common condition. As the founder of streetsblog.org, hopefully you've checked it out, and now as the co-host of The War on Cars, I've been reporting on and writing about and studying bike lanes and bike infrastructure and bike advocacy for like 15 years now. And one of the things that I can say for sure is that, if people in your town, if you have a new piece of bike infrastructure and people in your town are, say, complaining about lost parking spots, if they are writing letters to the editor about scofflaw, entitled cyclists, ruining the roads, or if there are athletic men on road bikes who are deeply upset that a street has been made better for people who take their kids to school on a bike, if you have old, stodgy newspaper columnists in town who all of a sudden are experts on bike lanes and they don't like them, and if you have people showing up to community meetings, arguing that, say, like bike lanes are part of an elite conspiracy, if you have any symptoms like this, then it is a very good chance that your town is suffering from what I call bikelash, a bad condition of bikelash. And what I do want to say is that bikelash, having studied many cases over the years now, bikelash is a completely natural part of an American city's 21st century maturation process. Bikelash is normal. It is nothing to be embarrassed about. Dr. Naparstek here to assure you. I'm not really a doctor. However, left untreated, bikelash can ruin a city. Bikelash can delay and prevent much needed bike infrastructure from being built. Bikelash can waste an enormous amount of your time, of bike advocates' time and energy. And so it's really important to be able to sort of identify bikelash and treat it. And I think it's a good idea in a lot of these cases, maybe less so with, I assume you're smart growth people, so you're going to know a lot of this, but it's good to just sort of back up a bit and sort of talk about the background and where bikelash comes from. And really the root cause in some ways is just 20th century urban planning, transportation policy, and land use. So for 80 years, for even longer, transportation policy has been oriented toward maximizing the city's capacity to accommodate motor vehicles, specifically cars and trucks. And even in New York City, even with a mayor who was really actually quite progressive on transportation issues, Michael Bloomberg in New York, back when we were just starting up Streets blog in 2006, he was saying stuff like this. We like traffic. It means economic activity. It means people coming here. And this is not how it always was. City streets weren't always for cars. City streets, like on the Lower East Side of Manhattan, were places where all kinds of activities took place, all kinds of economic, social, cultural activity. Streets were, and they still are, public spaces. Streets were places, even when I was a kid, we played in the street, and that was totally normal. And that was in Washington, D.C. in like the 70s and 80s. And that was how, in fact, for about 5,000 years of civilization prior to World War II, city streets were places where many more things happened than just the movement and storage of motor vehicles. And obviously, I don't need to tell you that. You guys live in one of the, nicest, in or around one of the nicest downtowns in America. You clearly know what good streets can be, what good urbanism can be. It's why I love Portsmouth and have loved visiting Portsmouth. I don't pretend to know the city that well. But it also suggests that, this is in the bones of Portsmouth. Portsmouth is a pre-automobile era city fundamentally. And, that city, that historic core, I would assume from what I saw when I've visited Portsmouth a couple times I've been there, that the pre-automobile core is the most treasured and valuable asset of the city. And that's an argument that I would think people would be able to hear who are not necessarily cyclists, that this is something that everyone can agree on, that we have this great historic pre-automobile core. You know, there weren't bike lanes, you know, on Congress Street. It looks like there was light rail. It was clearly designed to be a walkable, transit-oriented city, though, to be fair, they ruined it pretty quickly. So this is a postcard from 1935. That previous one there is 1905. And that's what happened in most American cities. And in New York, where I live, as Jane Jacobs phrased it, we nibbled away at the public space of our streets that was used by pedestrians and people who were not in motor vehicles. Here's a before and after picture of front stoops and the fronts of buildings on Lexington Avenue at East 89th Street in Manhattan, 1913 versus today. And you can see that there was this enormous project from about 1948, and it continued into the 90s actually, of just shearing away, nibbling away, as Jane put it, at the sidewalks and widening the streets to retrofit and accommodate the motor vehicle. And of course, if you plan and design and engineer your city for cars and traffic, there's a pretty good chance you'll succeed, and you will end up with more cars and traffic. Here is a photo of your very own July 4th holiday traffic heading north up I-95. So that's what we did. We planned and designed our cities for cars and trucks, as Fred Kent from Project for Public Spaces likes to say. And we ended up here at the beginning of the 21st century with cities full of cars and trucks. And to continue to abuse the Dr. Naparstek health and medicine metaphor, you know, there is a healthier way to do this. There is a healthier way to plan and design and think about our cities. And this approach is often called livable streets. You know, we know that the automobile, particularly the internal combustion engine automobile, the gas burning, exhaust spewing automobile, doesn't work very well in the urban core. It just doesn't. And while there are many reasons for this, and this presentation does not really delve into all of them, and you guys certainly know them. I mean, my top reason is probably horn honking and noise as I'm just walking around the city. But the climate crisis alone dictates that we have to remove automobiles from our urban cores. That this is one of the easier ways that we can really start to get a handle on our carbon emissions in this country, is by removing cars. And it is coastal cities like Portsmouth and New York and many others that really should be leading the way in this. And you know, I know that people still weirdly are not open to hearing climate as a critique or as a reason for doing things, but I think we just have to keep talking about it. And cities are doing it. This is the thing. This is the thing that I think should give you hope and should really show people that this is possible, and it can be inexpensive. It can be quick. You know, it can be done with temporary materials. That was Chicago. This slide is Washington, D.C. Cities all around the US, all around the world, are reallocating their street space from cars to more efficient modes. And it really just doesn't take that much. And Portsmouth knows that. And of course, people get upset about that. There are new modes of transportation actually emerging now that I think will make it easier for others to get on board with these ideas. So electric assist bicycles are coming online in a big way. And in fact, I would urge you to go, if you listen to an episode of our podcast, The War on Cars, this new episode, which I just produced and released yesterday, it's all about electric bikes and this push that's being made next door to you in Vermont to encourage and subsidize and promote and normalize e-bikes. And in New York, we're starting to see guys like this, like guys who are hauling freight, not just guys, people who are hauling freight on bicycles and e-bikes. And that's been a game changer because now we have sort of corporate interests. We have businesses with some interest in promoting bike infrastructure. And that too is a game changer, just like the electric bike. Bike share systems, obviously, are another huge move for livable streets. This is a great way for people to just be introduced to biking. During the pandemic, we're seeing more and more street space allocated to outdoor uses like pop-up cafes. You know, this has been happening pretty steadily for 15 years in big cities, but again, it's just another big livable streets feature. And, you know, in New York, we've seen some pretty extraordinary conversions of pavement to parks, of asphalt to plazas. This was one of the first ones that happened in 2007 after a new transportation commissioner came in named Jeanette Sadik-Khan. Times Square, the crossroads of the world, supposedly, allegedly, is now basically a car-free space. And this is how they did it. This is what it looked like. It went from this to this. And all the materials you see there were just temporary materials. There were no digging, no pouring of concrete, no redoing, you know, sewers and drains and big electric utility moves. Just let's put some stuff on the ground and see if it works. And it worked, and they built it out. And they kept building it out, and they continue to do so. Another big feature of the Livable Streets movement, another really good tool to use if you're an advocate, is a car-free street event. So events like Cyclavia in Los Angeles, or Summer Streets in New York, like events that just encourage people to get out on bikes, to start to experience the street as something more than a place for the storage and movement of motor vehicles. And of course, transit. We won't talk too much about that, but all around the country, we're starting to see these like light, quick, relatively cheap redesigns of streets, and then more intensive ones that just start to encourage transit. And of course, perhaps the ultimate Livable Streets move was Seoul, South Korea's move on the Cheongcheon River, which was, you know, in 1971, they completed construction of a 3.2 mile, 4-lane elevated expressway through the middle of Seoul, South Korea. The highway was built directly on top of the river. That was really the river that Seoul was built around. And then in 2002, Seoul's new mayor, Lee Myung-bak, began tearing down the highway that he, as a young engineer, had helped to build 30 years before. And the project was accompanied by like new parks and new offices and new bus rapid transit projects, an entire urban renewal, but a good urban renewal that has been really incredibly successful, and also got Lee Myung-bak elected as president of South Korea. So it's a great case to show your local politicians who are afraid of these ideas. And so the bottom line here is like Livable Streets is about prioritizing the needs of human beings above the requirements of machines, you know, in our urban public spaces. You know, when a street isn't filled with 3,000-pound gas-burning personal transportation devices, that's all a car is. You know, an electric scooter is a personal transportation device, a car is a personal transportation device. But when a street is not filled with these 3,000-pound glacier melting personal transportation devices, new forms of public life become possible, okay? And so this is a takeaway that I hope, and I'm not gonna give you like a prescriptive, like here's 3 takeaways, so take them as they come. But we don't only wanna talk about bike lanes in Portsmouth when we want bike lanes in Portsmouth. This is sort of my opinion from my experience. We want our bike lane to be part of a bigger vision for the city as a whole. You know, a vision that many people in the city, even those who will never ever ride a bicycle, can get excited about, okay? Like, I don't know how many people in this yoga class ride bicycles, but they are certainly enjoying a different way of using the street. And they are our allies, and we should get them on board, and we should get them excited too. Any questions? Should we do a quick, should I stop there? It's so weird to talk to just a computer. I have no idea if you're falling asleep or Carter, should we, no? Keep going.
I think we can keep going, but I will say if anyone does have any questions, feel free to pop them into the chat. And when we get to the end of the presentation, Aaron will grace us very kindly with some Q&A.
Oh, that's, oh, you will grace me kindly with questions.
Okay, great. Thanks, Aaron.
Yeah, no, I love the conversation part. So going back to the terrible medical metaphor, which is clearly inappropriate during a pandemic. Bike lanes, they generate a kind of immune response in the body politic. And I have a lot of theories. I have a lot of theories about why this is. You know, editing Streets blog, I had this view of all these bike lane battles all over the country. They come up again and again. You can actually, another episode of The War on Cars, there are 2 more that I will recommend. And one is our live event in Denver. And another is a 2-part episode about some public meetings over bike lanes that took place in Brooklyn, where my co-host, Doug Gordon, almost got beaten up. You know, he was on the pro-bike lane side of the argument. But the same stuff comes up over and over again, and it's really, really intense. The good news on that is that similar strategies and tactics can be used over and over again also. Sorry, I have a dog growling in the room now. Okay, come on. Somebody's coming in the door, so I just need to let them in. Come on, Ozzy. Shush. Stop it.
This is pandemic life.
Yeah, man. I knew that was going to happen. I'm home alone right now, too. So, all right.
Oh, good. You're doing great, Aaron. Thank you.
Thanks. Sorry about that. So, in 2011 in Brooklyn, New York, we had this incredible case of backlash. All of the things that happened in this case happen everywhere else, but because it was New York City and because this case was just nuts, I guess, this was a very extreme case of bikelash. And I just want to tell you, I'm just going to go through this story of what happened because there were some amazing things. And I think there are a lot of lessons to be learned in this story. So the bike lane in question was built on a street called Prospect Park West in Brooklyn, New York. The star shows you where it is, if that gives you a little bit of the lay of the land. That 1 mile green strip right there, that's Prospect Park West. It's a boundary along a beautiful big park in the middle of Brooklyn. And it's a fancy street for the most part. You know, it's a place where you can find a $9 million brownstone where, you know, former governors live. And it's always, it's near this big plaza called Grand Army Plaza, a big traffic rotary. There's always been traffic problems here. You know, when you go back and you sort of do the research on the history, in the late 1920s, the city fathers of Brooklyn installed this counter at the far end of Prospect Park West to count the number of people who were being run over by cars in Brooklyn. So, you know, it's the same stuff that we complain about, people have been complaining about for 100 years. And Prospect Park West, the street along the park, it was a speedway. It was a highway. It was like a 3-lane highway. It actually could have been 4. You know, very wide lanes, 2 sides, 2 parking on 2 sides. There was a senior center on one corner so all these old folks who were always trying to cross the street, they couldn't quite make it before the cars would start speeding at them. And obviously it's a park, so little league kids and people want to go there. You know, it was a major destination, and it was hard to get across the street. And it was certainly hard to bike. And we started going out as part of our advocacy and just clocking cars with a radar gun. And we were finding people going 50 miles an hour regularly, even up to 65. There were crashes pretty frequently, overturned SUVs. You'd just be walking your dog up to the park and you would see just a car on the sidewalk or something. And you just realize, you know, this is potentially a disaster. So 15 years ago, and I mean, these things take a long time to accomplish often. And that's something that's really important to remember, how slow these things are. But we began to start to talk about the issues on Prospect Park West and around Grand Army Plaza. We kicked off this community process. We created a separate organization called the Grand Army Plaza Coalition to bring all these stakeholders together. And again, I think that's going to be a takeaway for anybody who's trying to do this kind of work, is it's really all about organizing stakeholders, bringing people together. And if it requires creating a new umbrella, that's as easy as making a website and a letterhead and a name, doing community workshops. We engaged the Danish urban designer Jan Gehl on his very first gig in the United States to start to look at Grand Army Plaza and Prospect Park West and tell us what we could start to do with it. His great quote was that if Frederick Law Olmsted, the designer of Prospect Park West, could see how Grand Army Plaza is treated today, with all of the asphalt and the little islands, with pedestrians jumping like Eskimos. It's probably racist now, actually. I don't think you can say that, but he would be rotating he would be spinning in his grave endlessly. Jan is an older guy from Denmark. I'm removing Eskimos from my presentation. Anyways, GAPCO started to do, we even did an international design competition. I mean, we had like all this talent around us, and we started to try to engage them for just putting ideas on the table. And this was the first 2 years of the process. And after many, many meetings and a lot of community process, we got a redesign. And you can kind of see what it did here. It narrowed Prospect Park West from 3 lanes to 2 lanes. And we got this great 2-way protected bike lane that really just transformed the street overnight into a place where, you know, little kids could really just bike on their own and get to the park. People could go both ways. It really felt, I mean, it was hard to describe. It was really just transformative. You know, you're just like, wow, this, you know, sometimes you get a bike lane striped on a street and you're just like, that's just paint. There's still people double parking on it. This was different. This was like, this really just makes so many people's lives better immediately. And the impact was really dramatic and measurable. You know, so speeding went way down. People were no longer biking on the sidewalk, which was a huge issue and really pissed people off and made people angry at cyclists, even though a lot of those people biking on the sidewalk were little kids. Car traffic volumes and travel time stayed the same. It had no real impact on people's trips and cars. Crashes went way down because cars were going a little more slowly for the most part. And it was popular. People really liked it. So this seemed like a great project. It seemed like a great win. However, we start seeing these flyers around the neighborhood. And as is so often in the case of Bikelash, you got these kind of like anonymous, nobody's putting a name on anonymous flyers, all caps, maybe a little bit, you know, a little bit intense, upset about the bike lanes, afraid to stop or even open your car door, can't park, can't cross the street. The danger and congestion caused by these lanes must be stopped. So you can feel and you can see the intensity. And I'll just say another takeaway here, and I think this is really important to remember in this kind of advocacy, is that you can never make everyone happy. You can never make anyone happy, no matter how extensive your community process was. There are going to be people who feel like, you know, they were left out, they were cut out, and they disagree. Because for most people, the community process starts when they get involved, when they heard about the project. You know, you might have been doing 3 years of international design competitions with Danish, you know, urban planner Jan Gehl. They don't care. Like, the community process started when they heard about it. And that's the way it is for a lot of people. And the community is also me. The community is me and my family and my friends. So we might not even have the same idea of who the community is. So community process is really hard, and you will never ever make everyone happy. And you can waste a lot of time trying to do that, and you need to try some of it, but you also need to know when to stop. And that's an art, not a science. one of the things that became clear on Prospect Park West really quickly is that this was not your typical group of neighborhood NIMBYs. We had some extremely powerful people who were opposed to this project. Former Deputy Mayor Norman Steisel in the Dinkins administration a long, long time ago, and a former DOT commissioner, the previous DOT commissioner, the DOT commissioner who'd been replaced by Jeanette Sadiq Khan, Iris Weinschall. She was very opposed to this project. So these were savvy, powerful operators. And then there was Iris Weinschall's husband, who was at the time arguably the most powerful Democrat in New York State, Chuck Schumer. And if only if only Chuck were still had his Darth Vader attributes. I actually sort of wish he did these days. But Chuck is still powerful in New York. The funny thing is, Chuck loves to bike, but he's always biking out of his building on Prospect Park West. You see him frequently on Sundays riding around Brooklyn, and yet he was still sort of opposed to the bike lane. It was never clear if his heart was into it. These guys, they called themselves Neighbors for Better Bike Lanes, and they created two sort of AstroTurf front groups: Neighbors for Better Bike Lanes and Seniors for Safety. So, you know, they're just a bunch of guys who want better bike lanes and safe seniors. And they somehow retained one of the biggest, most powerful, meanest litigation firms in the world, Gibson, Dunn and Crutcher. This is a firm that they represented George W. Bush in a small case called Bush v. Gore 2000. They represent companies like Chevron when Chevron dumps a bunch of oil into the Ecuadorian rainforest. They represent DuPont when there's a chemical spill. And now they were trying to get rid of our bike lane. It was really stunning and weird. And this guy was going on TV saying things like, as a former federal prosecutor, I've never seen something like this. I've tried mob cases. I've never seen anything as dirty as this bike lane. It was and that was my work he was talking about. That was my community work. So it was tough to deal with. And these guys were, they were energized. It was a small group of people who were willing to get out on the street and really fight, against this bike lane. And one of the things, by the way, another takeaway is that if you ever see a group come out and they all have just one type of handwriting on their demonstration signs, then they're probably not really much of a grassroots group. Just somebody did all the signs. But, not to single this woman out, but she really to me summed up the intensity of feeling that goes into this. And I think one of the things that happens in these cases is, bike lanes have to go through a rigorous community process, and there's often lots and lots of things that people feel upset about in a big community. And there's lots of things that they don't get a say over. They don't get to say anything. They don't get to participate. Some private developer wants to build a condo. Your favorite diner closes. The local factory shuts down, or the fishing industry is going down the tubes. There's all these things you can be upset about. There's no public meeting. There's no place to voice those concerns. Bike lanes almost always go through a public process, and they become a flashpoint for anything that's going wrong in the community. And often what we've found over and over again is that it's ultimately often just about parking, at least in big cities. This may be less of a Portsmouth thing or a smaller city thing, but this sign, and it was actually held by a lovely older woman named Lois Carswell, who's no longer alive, but I mean, her name, Lois Carswell. It was like Dickens was writing this. Her message was bike lanes equal fewer parking spots. And that, that to her, to me, that I could be holding that sign. Yay, bike lanes equal fewer parking spots. We want bike lanes. So there's just a total disconnect here about what the issue is. And this group was incredibly effective. They had smart, powerful, media savvy people And they just started attacking the credibility and the authority of the New York City Department of Transportation. And when this was happening, it was actually during the Obamacare debate. And I think you'll probably see this in Portsmouth too, that when there are fights happening on the national level, you'll see them starting to bleed over into the local fight. So we would hear things like DOT fudges the data, which there was some accusation that Obama was fudging data. DOT is jamming bike lanes down our throat. That was like, you're trying to jam Obamacare down our throat. A lot of the same rhetoric was coming up in the bike lane fight. People had cameras in their apartments and were counting cars and trying to make arguments. And it was working. Like, the local media was picking up on it. The New York Post, we have this tabloid culture. They loved it. They loved it. They loved the fight. They loved the conflict. So the Bikelash was metastasizing. It was like a pandemic. It was spreading. It was just rapidly spreading throughout the community. And getting these crazy headlines and crazy local TV stories. And the local TV guys, they're never on your side in these bike lanes. I mean, I won't say never. Actually, in the Denver episode, we had a local TV reporter come and join us in that episode because he was doing such interesting, good work. But you got to keep in mind, like, a lot of this local media, to the extent that they're funded at all, are funded by local automobile dealerships and affiliated industries. And you get these crazy reports like this was one of the more famous ones. Marcia Kramer, New York City's top political reporter, saying that a bike lane on 2nd Avenue that is next to the Israeli consulate, leaving many wondering what would happen if a man on a bike were a terrorist. So it was just getting so amped up, and you can laugh at it, except that it was having these real world impacts on people who biked in the city. There was actually like violence against cyclists. You were hearing stories of people being pushed over, of people being, of tacks being left in new bike lanes, and tires being popped. NYPD was not helping at all. They were doing these crazy crackdowns where they would go ticket triathletes training in the park at 5 a.m. or a woman would get a ticket for having a tote bag on her handle. The cops didn't really know what the laws were, and they would do sting operations like this one. They would literally put cruisers in the bike lane, and then when a bicyclist went around the cruiser to go up the avenue, they would ticket the bicyclist for going out of the bike lane, which is not actually a law, I will add. But the guys thought it was, and they thought this was a good way to make that law be broken. So that's what we were dealing with. It was fucking crazy. So, excuse my language. And it was also emerging as a big political issue in the next mayoral campaign. So you probably remember this guy. When I become mayor, you know what I'm going to spend my first year doing. I'm going to have a bunch of blue ribbon cuttings tearing out your effing bike lanes. This was what Anthony Weiner told Mayor Bloomberg at an event. And again, you could say like, haha, you're kind of a clown, Anthony. We don't really think you're going to do that. But we were also watching other cities like Toronto, where they had this equally seemingly crazy mayor saying, roads are built for cars and buses and trucks and not for people on bikes. Cyclists are a pain in the ass to motorists. Yes, I have smoked crack cocaine. That was Rob Ford. But all real quotes, by the way. But so we were seeing bike lanes being torn out in Toronto, which in many ways is a city that's analogous to New York. And we were seeing people protesting that, the blocking the removal of bike lanes with their bodies. And we were seeing our own mayoral candidate, who was not really a front runner at the time, but saying things like, I'm a motorist, and doing photo opportunities for the New York Times, with him driving around Brooklyn and Queens in his car, like the common man, the motoring common man, and just saying things about the car-free Times Square and the bike lane on Prospect Park West that were very negative. And there was just a real concern going into the 2013 mayoral race that we had a big problem. And I think you guys are facing similar things in Portsmouth, where you have to just be a little bit worried that the politics have turned against you. And so some of the things, I'll start to talk about some of the things that we did. One of the interesting aspects at this time was like, it was one of the first times we had ever seen Bikelashers using the internet at all. One of the things you might have noticed from the photos of the Bikelash folks is that they're older. And that's basically, that is just, you know, this is a generational fight in many ways, which is not to say that folks who are supporting bike lanes are all younger, but it's a much more diverse group than the folks who tend to oppose bike lanes. And this was an interesting case because it was really one of the first times where we saw those groups of Bikelashers starting to figure out how to use these tools that had really been solely our domain. But the internet is good for illustrating scale of support, you know, and it really gives everyone a sense of the playing field in certain ways, with followers, with retweets, with friends, and Facebook groups. And one of the things that was really heartening to us, and I think made it a lot easier for politicians to begin to get on board with us, was the simple fact that we outnumbered these guys almost 10 to 1 every time we showed ourselves in public. And you could really, really see that in Facebook. So they had 291 members in their group. We had almost 2,000 in ours. Another tool, and so we'll just start to get right into some of the tools that we were using, was Streets Blog, was the website that that I founded in 2005, 2006 with the help of Mark Gorton and a few other key players at the Open Planning Project. We had our own media channel and channels. And this is another tool, strategy, tactic that I think you guys really need to think about, especially if you are dealing with a press that is, if not hostile, then not super understanding or sympathetic, which is very normal. You know, who else is going to promote and publish a photo, you know, of just a bunch of kids biking around in a bike lane that shows like, hey, you know, this is a facility that's being used by families. You're not going to get the New York Times to do that, or the, what's yours called, the Seacoast, whatever. You know, you might not get them to do that. So it's really good to start to have your own outlets, and you can also fact check the claims of people like the Gibson Dunn attorney, you know, who's just out there telling lies basically. And just remember how far we've come. I mean, this is what Livable Streets advocacy looked like in the old days, you know, not that long ago, like even into the mid 90s, where it was just like handing out flyers on the street. It was very marginal. And it still is marginal in some ways, but we have these tools now that you know, you don't even need to build an entire publication of your own. You can just use a hashtag. You can just decide like, hey, we're going to be like hashtag Bike Portsmouth. And when news, when information, when stuff that the entire bike community needs to know happens, we're gonna all just collectively post it here. And this was interesting. I mean, people got together and decided, okay, what's our hashtag going to be? And it stayed. It stuck around for geez, like probably a decade now. And just in the end, it's really about organizing. It's really about organizing and showing up in person. And you can do a lot with online organizing, but it's really, really about getting bodies on the street when you need them. And I wish there were like an easier way to do that, but you know, to show that there are 50 people opposed to this bike lane and there are 300 who are willing to come out and say, we want it. And the 50 are all pretty much elderly and white and wealthy homeowners from one of the fanciest streets in all of Brooklyn. And the folks who want the bike lane are much more diverse in age and every other category imaginable. That really, really helps. So again, you can't really count on the media to get your story right. I remember this was one of the more upsetting instances of the great bike lane battles of 2011 when we did get 300 people out to a rally and they only had 50. And then, you know, you go to the New York Times the next day and it's cool, they covered it, but it's just dueling protests over a bike lane. It's like, wait a second, Our protest crushed their protest. Those weren't dueling. They only had 50 people and we had 300, but you don't necessarily get that. So you do need your own outlets. And you also have to expect that the public process is not going to go your way in many instances. So this is a picture from a community board meeting in Brooklyn. And I want to point out this particular tactic because it's a really good one where, you know, oftentimes community meetings will set themselves up. And I know this happens actually in New England select board meetings all the time too, where it comes time for public comment, be like, okay, we're going to invite up a person who's opposed to the bike lane and a person who's for it. And they'll just do one, each side will just get to talk until they sort of run out of time. But so you can bring 100 people to this meeting and they can have 20 people at the meeting. But because, you know, 10 people speak for one side and 10 people speak for the other, it seems like it's even. And that's very frustrating. So one of the things you want to do is, if you feel like you have the numbers, the first person who gets up on stage just says, hey, everybody who's in favor of this bike lane, could you please just raise your hand real quick and then take a photo. Take a photo of all those people raising their hands and you can see all the grumpy, generally older folks who are not raising their hands. Also at the door, when people come to a meeting at the door, put a sticker on all your supporters' chests. You can see little green Dayglow stickers on all the bike lane supporters. These are kind of like micro level tactics that really, really help. Always, Bikelashers want to portray you as an outsider. You are not really of Portsmouth. You are the other. You are a stranger in our community. We know not of bike lane supporters and bicyclists. What is our objective in this city? To stigmatize the use of cars? Do we want Brooklyn to replicate Amsterdam? This is the kind of thing that comes up over and over and over again, along with concern trolling. You know, I'm in favor of bikes, but I'm just I just think they're unsafe. I'm concerned about the safety of the people riding them, or nobody likes bikes, so we don't need bike lanes, but at the same time, there are too many cyclists, so bike lanes are too dangerous. These arguments come up again and again and again. But it's the outsider stuff that really is really important to counter and is really easy to counter too. So again, like, we're not Amsterdam, we're not Copenhagen, we're not Portland, Oregon, we're Brooklyn, you know. And I mean, look at this horrific scene in Amsterdam. Who would ever want this? And this stuff spreads. The media, the local press really likes it. It's kind of jingoistic. It's like, you know, we're the real New Yorkers. We're the real New Hampshire. What do you call New Hampshireites? New Hampshireites? Whatever we are. But, you know, this isn't Amsterdam is the great refrain of Bikelash. You know, we have many narrow streets and a great number of cars and trucks. We can't have bike lanes. Again, as if Amsterdam doesn't have narrow streets. And they somehow managed to get freight done. And of course, this is particularly amusing in New York, which was once New Amsterdam. So that's always quite funny. But again, like this sort of comparison to other places is key. You know, again, Borough President Marty Markowitz, who is sort of like a promoter of Brooklyn. Beijing is looking more like New York City, and New York City is moving towards Beijing of the 50s and 60s. You know, these guys think they're making good arguments. But I mean, this is Beijing in the 60s and this is Beijing today. Like, I don't know, which looks better to you? It does look like crowded biking. But, and it's not just a New York thing. I mean, there's just so many examples, you know, Chicago, this isn't some Seattle coffee grunge pothead experiment. This is Chicago. You know, we keep hearing that St. Paul wants to be like Portland. I always ask, how long does the snow last in Portland? You know, we have snow. There's always some local weather condition or hills or, you know, you just show people like, look, like it's possible to bike in the snow. So the othering is key. You know, they're gonna wanna make you the other. And here's the local press, the Brooklyn paper was just so good at these stories. Cycling flautist names her band Bike Lane. Like, look at the weird bike lane people. And this stuff is so predictable that bike advocates in Pittsburgh started creating their own sort of Bikelash bingo cards. And if you search for Bikelash bingo, you can find a few different renditions of this, and you can print them out and bring them to your next community meeting. And so how do we counter this othering? How do we counter this like sense that like they're trying to turn us into outsiders and not members of the community? And one of the key ways, again, is to have media channels where you can show who you are, who you are that supports this bike lane. And one of the things we created was this event called We Ride the Lanes. We got 700 people out. We got local sponsors, which allowed us to buy t-shirts. We had food out there. And we just got families riding back and forth, 700 people for like 45 minutes, just riding back and forth on a bike lane and just being like, look, like, here's who we are. Like, we're not weird, strange others. We are your neighbors. We are Brooklynites too. And you just have to keep showing the community that you are the community. You are Portsmouth. And again, like having an outlet like Streets Blog really, really helps for this. But also having a great photographer, like we had this guy, Dmitry Goodkov. And during this time of like extreme bikelash, all he was doing was going around New York City taking photos, bike portraits, what he called them, photos of cyclists. And it was this really beautiful online portfolio that a lot of people picked up on. It got put in art galleries. There's Prospect Park West that just showed like, yeah, bicyclists aren't hipsters. They're not all white. They're not all whatever you're accusing bicyclists of being. Bicyclists are all kinds of New Yorkers. Bicyclists are Leonardo DiCaprio. Bicyclists are Beyonce. Bicyclists are even Anthony Weiner, who said he was going to tear out all the bike lanes. This is literally when he was running for mayor before his campaign melted down. Bicyclists are even Chuck Schumer, for Christ's sake. Iris Weinshall's wife. We caught him on the bike lane during the whole conflict, which was one of the peak moments. And you really have to know how to work with your press. Work with your press. This is Doug, my co-host, my colleague, Doug Gordon. He got interviewed for a story about how bicyclists were two-wheel maniacs. Scofflaw cyclists. We're doing a story on scofflaw cyclists. Doug, what do you think about scofflaw cyclists? Why do cyclists break the law so often? Why are they so dangerous? Blah, blah, blah. Doug does the interview. And they're like, would you take a photo for our newspaper story? And Doug was like, sure, I would love to take a photo. And he goes out with his daughter and their bike. They take a photo. Here's the story. Policing the bikes. Two wheels must receive the same scrutiny as four. Activists want cyclists such as Doug Gordon, pictured here with his daughter Galit, to get more tickets. And so you can like turn these terrible press outlets around. You can like turn it into a win for your side if you just show them like, look at who we are. We're not wild scofflaws. We're just a dad with his daughter trying to bike safely in the neighborhood. And you just got to highlight the absurdities whenever you can. And ultimately, this is what broke the Bikelash was a great example from Washington State that we all loved. State lawmaker arguing that because cycling increases your heart rate and respiration, that you expel more carbon dioxide and you're a cause of climate change. You just got to like run with that stuff. You've got to kind of play with it. And in the end, the New York City Bikelash broke when a Wall Street Journal columnist named Dorothy Rabinowitz argued that there was an all-powerful bike lobby conspiring to destroy New York City. And that actually made it onto the Jon Stewart show. And I think it reached a certain point where people were just like, you know what, as Jon Stewart said, they're just effing bikes. They're not destroying the city. They're good for the city and people like them, and let's stop this. And I'll just say that one of the really key outcomes of the Bikelash, and this is something that you don't necessarily have to wait for Bikelash to happen, but it mobilized people. It organized us. It got us together. It created new media channels and mailing lists. And these are incredibly valuable assets. And it forced advocates to think bigger and work harder. And one of the things that we did after this Bikelash and going into the mayoral campaign that followed it is we actually created a political action committee. And I know there's now a Streets PAC in Boston as well. And this was just an incredibly powerful tool where we sort of decided, you know what, like we've been doing advocacy, but we really haven't been doing politics. And this is fundamentally about politics. And it's about voting, and it's about building power in the political system. And the political system is mostly dominated by older folks and people with money and people with homes and cars and people who do not care about biking at all. Like, you know, the teachers union. I mean, I'm not saying anything wrong with the teachers union, but biking is not their issue, you know? So we needed to be one of those interests that were saying like, hey, politicians, we're gonna give you money. We're gonna give you support. We're gonna give you a brand behind your campaign if you get behind our issues. And it was shocking how easy it was in many ways to do this. It didn't take a lot of money to start a PAC. It really didn't. It just took like 8 to 10 people who were just sort of dedicated to the process of surveying and meeting with candidates. Like here's Doug and I talking to Mayor, Bill de Blasio during the campaign, and interviewing city council members and really pressing them like, hey, are you gonna support bike projects? Let's get specific. Let's hear your vision. Making endorsements, being like, here are the candidates you should support. This means so much to these guys. Going out for the candidates that we do support, collecting signatures, registering voters. I mean, we're just doing politics now. Campaigning for the people we've endorsed. You saw city council members being like, wow, I got a Streets PAC endorsement. I'm gonna boast about that. We were nothing. We were like 8 people with a logo and like $2,000 in the bank. Endorsement events for our candidates. And I gotta say, this one for Bill de Blasio, who, and I'll just say like, I'm not even that big of a fan anymore in a lot of ways. It doesn't really matter for this story, but this endorsement mattered a lot to his campaign when it happened, and he appreciated it, and we were repaid with policy that we liked. And I don't think we necessarily would have gotten otherwise. And then just using our social media channels to spread the endorsements, doing the old-fashioned shoe leather stuff, sticking cards in people's bike spokes, getting out the vote, sitting there on the phones, calling people for our candidates. And the result was a huge night. Like, we partly because we picked the right candidates, probably. It's not all because of us, but 13 of our 18 city council candidates won. And man, that made such a difference when that council was seated, that we had 13 city council members who we had endorsed, who had been like, hey, I want your endorsement, Streets PAC. What policies do you need me to support? We got a mayor who started pushing for Vision Zero, which I think has mostly not been a huge success, but whatever, long story. And we eventually got a judge to kill the Prospect Park West bike lane lawsuit. So we won that too. And in the end, I just wanna say that it's really not that complicated. It's really about politics and power and who has the power. And I think the keys are again, it's like, it's not rocket science, but it's about organizing, building, and supporting a whole advocacy ecosystem. So a lot of different players who are working towards similar goals together. I think developing your own media channels is really key. And whether that's anything from your own blog, your own publication, to a hashtag. Building coalitions, working with folks who are not necessarily just working, they're not just interested in bike lanes, but they're interested in maybe safer streets around a school, or economic development opportunities, better retail, maybe bigger environmental issues. There's so many different coalitions to be built. And then really having in mind this bigger vision of the city that's not just bikes. Bikes are part of it, but we're pushing for a city that can do, that can, look like this in 10 or 20 years, that can, really putting forward a vision. So Bikelash can be treated effectively. I've seen it cured. Yeah, I think my final questions, for Portsmouth on this front would just be, asking ourselves, like, who are we, the bicycling community? How do we show others that the bicycling community is of and belongs to Portsmouth? We're not weird, mysterious strangers. Who are our allies outside the bicycling community? What kind of businesses and schools and organizations can we get on board and that we can get on board with also? And then what bigger vision is there for the city beyond bike lanes? Better biking is part of a process that will take us where as Portland? Where will we go in the future with this as part of it? And if you can start to address those questions, you can really start to defeat the Bikelash. And that's it. I mean, there's a lot more, but I just went on for way too long. So questions, comments? Should I stop sharing now? I can't believe I just talked at a computer for that long, so I have no idea.
Okay, so I'm going to be filtering the questions for everybody listening. If you have a question, you need to put it on the chat, and I'll speak them to Aaron so that he can answer them. So one other question that maybe it's not, I don't know if it was asked rhetorically, but just how exactly do you go about creating a streets pack? I mean, how does Portsmouth make a streets pack Portsmouth?
Yeah, I would, if you really wanted to do it, I would put you in touch with the attorney who put together a streets pack, a guy named Steve Vaccaro, who does a lot of bike work. And he's a personal injury attorney, but he did the legal work for us. There are some rules, and you've got to be careful about some rules and regulations and accounting. I shouldn't have made it sound like that flip and easy, but it's really just having an attorney who knows how to do that. And it's not that difficult to set up. It's not that expensive. Like I would just put you in touch, because I really couldn't tell you the very specific ways to do it.
So, I have a question about, there's this idea that, it's an axiom that's often repeated, if you build it, they will come. Is that always true? Is it true that if you build a, if you build whatever facility it is, if it's well built, people will come and use it, and or is there some underlying conditions that you find that are necessary?
It's not always true. I mean, it's often true, but it is not always true. And I'll just say one of the really key tools that we used in New York and other cities have used successfully is building things with temporary materials first. Testing things out with light, quick, cheap materials is a really important way to get projects done, because it helps you. If you can tell opponents, hey, look, we're going to put this bike lane down on Middle Street or whatever, but it's going to be made of like temporary materials. We're not doing anything too major here. If it turns out to be a failure, if everybody hates it, if the cyclists do not come, we can scrape this thing off the ground in a week, turn it back into the traffic sewer that it was. Sorry, I don't know that Middle Street was traffic sewer, but we can turn it back to the car-oriented street that it was, and we'll try these bike lanes somewhere else the next day. So that there's a way in which like temporary materials can make the whole process much smoother, just in case you get this instance where the cyclists didn't come and the opponents were right. Which doesn't happen that often, but it happens.
So next question, when do you know an advocacy strategy is going to work? How far along do you go before you call it or pivot to another strategy?
Yeah, that's really hard sometimes. Sometimes it's really, there's like this, sometimes it's really obvious when to cut and run, and I think it depends on what's on your agenda. What do you have on your plate? What do you want to get done this year and in the next 5 years? I'll give you an example. There was a proposal in New York about 10 years ago to turn Prince Street in Soho, which people might know of, into a car-free street. And it's a no-brainer, really a no-brainer. Like, you walk down that street, it's a tiny, narrow street. It should be car-free. It would be a way better neighborhood if it were. But there's all this opposition to it. And that opposition was really well organized and well funded and really angry. And there were other things to fight for. You know, in the end, it's like Soho's full of tourists. It's full of like big retailers like the Apple Store. This would be nice to have. But we have 3 or 4 or 5 other things that we want to fight for, and we're going to we have limited resources, and we're going to prioritize those things first. So it really becomes a question of looking at fights and seeing how big and bad they're going to be, looking at your own set of priorities and strategizing. What do you think is worth your time?
Okay. What do you think is better strategy? Is it making a busy street safer for cyclists, or should cyclists be rerouted to safer streets and just build bike boulevards and not try not to disturb the motorists who want to use the big busy streets?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. It's so case-based, and I'm not trying to dodge it, but it's so local.
Right.
Such a case-based scenario that, and I guess the way, sorry, what were you gonna say, Jonathan?
No, I just, it's really, the questions are really all about Middle Street, and,
Yeah, you had told me about that. There were some local streets that might be other alternatives.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, it's possible, but it would be, in my view, it would be less convenient. They're less direct. You wouldn't get to downtown as quickly. But that's actually the de facto way. For example, kids do ride their bikes to school, but they don't. They more often take the neighborhood streets rather than Middle Street.
Yeah. I will say this, that in my experience, and I think New York City DOT got really good at this under a guy named Ryan Russo, who is now the DOT commissioner out in Oakland, California. We've also done a podcast episode with him. He's great. DOT got really good at identifying streets where people already biked and then turning those streets into bike lane streets. And that really did make the politics a lot easier too. Like when you were trying to put a bike facility on a street where biking was not common, it was generally harder to do politically and also logistically, technically. I think there is a real benefit at times to looking at the streets where, say, the little kids are already biking and figuring out a way to just sort of double down on that and making it more clear and more explicit design that shows that this is the street for biking. That can be a good strategy.
Great. And then, we hear a lot, people say, well, nobody's using it. It's been there for 3 years. We hardly ever see anyone using it, even though there are statistics showing, there's about 120 users a day, which, certainly not the tens of thousands of cars that use it every day, but, it's not nobody. But nonetheless, it seems like the key to making it successful in the eyes of the public is increasing ridership, and still people don't feel safe doing it. I know a lot of people who will say, well, I'm never going to get on a bike because I see how terrible drivers are. Is there a way, how do we get more cyclists on the road, I guess is a big question. I mean, that's probably a pretty terrible question. It's probably too broad, but.
Yeah, I mean, there's that chicken and egg problem, right? Like, you build more infrastructure and more cyclists come, but you don't really get the infrastructure from your local politics until you have the cyclists. And that's always a struggle. And again, I would point to, I think my real question about Middle Street is do you believe that there's no one using it? Is there quote unquote no one using it?
No, there's people I ride it every day, and I always see least two or three other cyclists on it on the brief 3 minutes I'm on it, you know. So it's definitely other people using it.
It sounds to me like it's one of these cases where it's like, if you could actually get somebody out there for a chunk of the day, taking photos of people on bikes going down the street, and really just getting a sense of like, you know, I mean, that can be a little creepy. I think maybe you like have a sign, like, you know, Dimitri used to go out with like, you know, let me take your bike portrait. So, you know, something that makes it clear that like, hey, this is part of the advocacy effort. Just going out and taking pictures and seeing who you get. Who is this no one that's using the bike lane? Like, let's see no one who is using the bike lane. Who are they? Is it my kid's teacher? Is it a local business owner? Is it someone with his or her groceries? Is it an 8-year-old? Like, let's see who it is. And that just makes a big difference to know. And maybe you will find that it's not enough people to really make it worth the fight. Or maybe you'll find that, wow, there's a lot of folks using this, and this is worth fighting for. I think you almost need the data, you know?
We have the data. I mean,
okay.
Yeah. I mean,
maybe it's the next step. Maybe it's the qualitative piece. Like, you have the numbers, but who are the numbers? What do they look like?
For sure. So then here's another question that you've encountered in other places I know from listening to your podcast about, you know, that people say, you know, Middle Street's a beautiful street with, you know, beautiful homes on it. And they complain about the historic nature of it being ruined by these unsightly paint and plastic bollards. Is there a better treatment that could be done, or is it just I mean, would it be better with planters and flowers, or is there a way of making it beautiful to make it appealing, or is this, you just have to ignore those arguments?
I mean, I'm sorry I didn't include any images of that respond to that argument. That comes up all the time. Every case of Bikelash, somebody is there to make the historic argument. Like, this bike lane is destroying the historic quality of, you know, Prospect Park West or whatever street in whatever city. And it could even be a city like Phoenix that's barely, you know, not even 100 years old. But, you know, one of the things so if you have a forum, if you have a place where this is being discussed or written about, or a comment section or an editorial op-ed page, just pointing out like how many of the ahistorical things are on that street already before the bike lane is really a good thing. It's fun to do. You know, for example, cars. You know, Portsmouth it was built long before cars existed. Cars are a recent addition to Portsmouth, relatively speaking. You know, asphalt, thermoplastic white stripes, enormous day-glow pedestrian crossing signs, giant metal stop signs and traffic signals. All of this crapola is new modern stuff, okay? And so if people are okay with that, then they can be okay with a bike lane. And yes, there's also much nicer ways to design streets and bike lanes. I would recommend the book by John Massengale. God, what is it called? Well, I'll send it around. Great Streets. I think it's called Great Streets. Wrote it about 3 or 4 years ago. Just a fantastic book on how to make this kind of street design more aesthetically appealing and historically appropriate when needed.
Oh, great. Do you have tips for getting business owners involved in advocacy? I mean, obviously, you know, that improves foot traffic for shops. I mean,
yep.
Is there a good way of reaching out to them or making a pitch?
Boy, I'll tell you what I've done personally, which is like, I was trying to get a bike lane on my own local shopping corridor in my own neighborhood. And the DOT at the time was like, well, you know, we're about to start this repaving project. We would just be worried that the business owners would be angry about the bike lane. If you can like help us, if you can show us that the business owners would be cool with it, we would just put the bike lane in there because it's sort of on our agenda anyways. And I sort of puzzled over that. I was like, how am I going to do this? and I put together a one-page fact sheet about what the project was, had a few points about the benefits of biking. And then I went from door to door for like 20 blocks up and down this avenue. And you know, it's New York, it's not Portsmouth. So there were like 200 businesses. I hit every single one of them. I got a couple of people to join me. There were 3 of us. And we got like 90% of the business owners on board with the idea. And I think what I discovered in that process was generally that business owners are really, really supportive of this. You know, not like the local car dealership, not like the guy who sells enormous, you know, pieces of furniture or appliances like refrigerators. They want cars. But most of the other businesses that depend on foot traffic tend to be very supportive, at least in most of the places that I've seen do this. And it really just requires walking up, knocking on the door and asking them very often. There's really no shortcut.
Great. So we have probably time for one more question. If anybody else wants to throw one up, I may have missed one. I'm just scrolling through the chat real quick to see if trying to group them together, you know. If anyone wants to throw up a question that maybe I missed, oh, there's one. Okay. So we have a lot of, I'm just reading it verbatim, hopefully it's a good one. All right. We have a lot of road bikers here, some of whom say they'd rather not be in a parking protected lane, preferring to merge in and out of traffic. How do you get the point across that it's for the less able riders and make allies? Yeah, so, right.
Such a great question. God, those guys can be really destructive in these processes. I've seen that happen a lot. The other group of cyclists that can be problematic are the quote unquote vehicular cyclists, who are, there are fewer and fewer of those guys around anymore. But people who believe that bikes should basically function like cars. I mean, look, like, you've just got to kind of have it out with those guys. You know, you've got to just be like, look, man, like, you can still bike in the road with cars because you like doing that. But we have a 12-year-old here who's trying to get to school. We have, you know, a mom, you know, or we have like elderly folks. We have people carrying groceries. We have, like, there's a lot of other people who want to be able to use this street, and they need a facility to do it. They're not all, you know, some sort of like buff, you know, lycra clad person on a $10,000 road bike. I mean, the good news about those guys is, like, it's pretty easy to just make them look like schmucks. And I'm a road biker too, like, I do it also, but I'm always blown away when those guys argue against bike infrastructure that would just make biking more accessible for so many people. It's just mind-boggling to me. And you really just have to embarrass them. You just have to somehow just stand up at a meeting, you know, be like a pregnant mom with a kid and a bag of groceries, and stand up at the meeting and just be like, look, like, I want to bike here too, or what, you know, whatever it takes. That's where a little shame is, you know, might be helpful.
Yeah, we get a lot of people saying at meetings, well, I'm a cyclist, I'm all for bikes, I even contribute to, you know, this or that bike advocacy you know, organization. However, I'm just against this bike lane.
Right, exactly. That's another, man, that is a very common trope. Doug, my colleague Doug, actually has a great bit on that. He calls it, some of my best friends are bike lanes.
Yeah.
You know, so it's like, you know how that kind of, it's just like, oh yeah, I have no problem with that kind of person. Some of my best friends are that kind of, so yeah, so some of my best friends are bike lanes. And you know, that's just, it's just NIMBYism. It's just a kind of NIMBYism. Like, don't put it here. I'm totally cool with bike lanes, but put it somewhere else. And that's a place where you really do the show them who the community is kind of thing. Show them who's going to use this bike lane. You know, show them that it's the people who are already out there biking in front of their street. Show them that it's the little kids and the seniors and the teachers and the local business owners. And, you know, it just becomes, it's just like, come on, man. This is the place where there's demand for it, and it doesn't hurt you, and people need it.
Great.
Awesome.
Thank you so much, Aaron. Really appreciate it. So much of this really deeply resonated with things that have been happening in our community. And I know reading some of the chats, other people are feeling that too. I did just want to take a quick moment to say that, you know, within Portsmouth, there's a lot of attention on this latest bike lane. And that's where sort of all the focus and energy goes, it seems like. But the city actually did adopt a bicycle pedestrian plan in 2014, and the plan lays out a complete citywide bicycle and pedestrian network, provides guidelines and standards for bicycle and pedestrian facilities, and includes a prioritized list of infrastructure improvements as well as non-infrastructure initiatives to improve connectivity and safety for bicyclists and pedestrians. So we do have some framework for other projects as well. And so far they've completed about, so far they have sort of allocated about 18% of their recommended projects from the original bike plan. 8% are completed or under construction, 4% are in design, and 6% are in the CIP for future years. And they're on a path to have 20% of that original recommended bike and ped plan within 10 years. So there are things happening already, and it's good to be mindful of that. Obviously, there's a lot more that can happen, and I think you've given us a lot of things to think about, Aaron. This has been incredibly helpful in terms of thinking about moving forward and supporting and advocating for biking in our community. So thank you so much for doing this. Thank you so much for standing by through these these strange times that we're living in. We had you standing by, I know, back in the spring, trying to figure out what we were going to do and if we were going to reschedule. So I really appreciate your flexibility here with us. And I'm so glad we waited, because this was a really great talk, and I think just, again, really resonated. So thank you so much. We do have another upcoming event that we are co-hosting or co-sponsoring. It's being put on by New Hampshire Housing. And it's called From the Outskirts to Downtown, Taxes, Land Use, and the Value in Seacoast Communities. And it's a presentation by Joe Minicozzi of Urban 3, and that's going to be October 21st at 7 p.m. And we'll have registration information coming out fairly shortly. And then once again, you can always see any of our past events. Once we've had a chance to post this talk tonight, we'll have this up on our website as well, and that's portsmouthsmartgrowth.org. You can see past events and make donations, and hopefully get a chance to rewatch or share with friends who couldn't make it tonight this great talk from Aaron. And I think that's it. And again, thank you so much to Laura for helping us out with the tech aspects of the presentation tonight. And we're really excited this went off fairly seamlessly. And just thank you so much, everyone, for being here. Even in this virtual space, we wish we could see you in person, but we're really appreciative that you're here tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you.